The room was filled with laughter, soft music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Elena stood in the center of it all, one hand resting gently on her growing belly, a quiet smile on her face as friends and family surrounded her. "Glow like this, and he might never let you out of his sight," someone joked. She laughed softly, lowering her gaze for a second, almost shy. "He already doesn't." And at that moment, she believed it. Across the room, Daniel stood watching her, his expression unreadable to anyone who didn't know him well. To everyone else, he looked like a proud husband, successful, composed, completely in control. But inside, something was already shifting. Something she couldn't see, something he hadn't yet admitted to himself. 3 months later, the room was silent. No laughter, no music, no warmth. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Elena sat alone on the couch, her phone still in her hand, her body completely still except for the slow rise and fall of her breathing. On the screen, a photo. Daniel, standing beside another woman, dressed in white, smiling, married. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but she didn't scroll, didn't zoom in, didn't react the way most people would expect. Because the truth was, her heart didn't shatter in that moment. It didn't need to. It had already been breaking, slowly, quietly, piece by piece, long before this. This was just the moment she could finally see it. She blinked once, then again, as if her eyes needed time to accept what they were looking at. Not a rumor, not a misunderstanding, not something that could be explained away with a phone call or a rushed apology. This was real, documented, celebrated, public. Her husband hadn't just left her, he had replaced her. Her hand moved instinctively, resting over her stomach. 6 months pregnant, a life growing inside her, a life he had once placed his hand over with awe, whispering, "This is everything." The memory came uninvited, sharp, clear, cruel. "Do you think it'll be a boy or a girl?" She had asked back then, lying beside him, her head resting lightly on his chest. He had smiled, tracing slow circles on her arm. "Doesn't matter. As long as they have your smile and your stubbornness," she teased. He laughed softly. "No, they don't need that kind of trouble." She looked up at him, studying his face in that quiet moment. "You're happy, right?" There had been a pause, small, almost invisible, but it was there. "I am," he said, and she had believed him. Because love, when it's real to you, makes you trust even the answers that hesitate. Now, sitting alone in a house that felt too large and too empty, Elena let out a slow breath. Still no tears, just understanding, not of why he did it, but of how long he had already been gone. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A message, not from him. It hadn't been from him in weeks. Instead, it was from a friend. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you." She stared at the words. So everyone else knew. Everyone else had seen it. Everyone else had processed it. Before her, a strange kind of ache settled in her chest. Not loud, not overwhelming. Just heavy. The kind of pain that doesn't scream. The kind that stays. Across the ocean, in a city that never slowed down, Daniel adjusted the cuff of his suit as he stood in front of a large mirror. The room behind him was elegant, expensive, perfectly arranged. It should have felt like success, like freedom, like the life he had chosen. But something about it felt distant, like he was standing inside a version of his life instead of actually living it. Behind him, Sophia stepped into view, her reflection appearing beside his. "You're going to be late," she said, adjusting her earrings. "I won't," he replied, his tone calm, controlled. "You've been saying that all morning." He didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed on his own reflection, studying it, as if searching for something that wasn't there anymore. "Are you thinking about her again?" Sophia's voice wasn't accusing, but it wasn't soft either. It was observant, direct. Daniel exhaled quietly. "I'm thinking." "That's not what I asked." He finally turned slightly, meeting her eyes through the mirror. "Then maybe you already know the answer." She held his gaze for a second, then looked away, reaching for her bag. "You made your choice." The words lingered longer than she intended, or maybe exactly as long as she intended. Choice. That was the word everyone would use. Simple, clean, easy to understand. But the truth wasn't that simple, because Daniel didn't feel like he had chosen this. Not in one clear moment. Not in one decisive step. It had happened gradually, quietly, the way distance grows in a room where no one acknowledges it. It started with late nights, then longer trips, then conversations that felt more like obligations than connection. Elena hadn't changed. That was the problem. She had remained steady, loving, consistent. And somewhere along the way, Daniel had started to feel disconnected from that steadiness. Not because it was lacking, but because he no longer knew how to exist inside it. Then came Sophia, different, unpredictable, effortless in a way that didn't ask anything from him. With her, there were no expectations, no responsibilities waiting at home, no quiet questions in the night about whether he was truly happy. With her, everything felt lighter, at least in the beginning. "You're doing it again," Sophia said, pulling him back to the present. "Doing what?" "Leaving the room without actually leaving." He gave a faint, almost tired smile. "I'm right here." She shook her head slightly. "No, you're not." Back in the quiet house, Elena finally placed her phone down on the table, carefully, as if even that small movement required intention. She stood up slowly, her body adjusting to the weight she now carried, not just physically, but emotionally. Each step felt deliberate, grounded, real. She walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside, just enough to let the fading evening light in. Outside, life continued. Cars passed, people walked. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Her reflection appeared faintly against the glass. She studied it for a moment, not searching for answers, not even searching for strength, just acknowledging, "This is real," she whispered, not as a question, as a statement. For the first time since seeing the photo, her eyes closed, and this time, a single tear slipped down. Not dramatic, not uncontrollable, just quiet, honest. Because this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about timing, about being left at the exact moment she needed him most, about carrying a future he had already walked away from. And somewhere, beneath the pain, beneath the confusion, beneath the silence, something else began to form. Not strength, not yet, but the beginning of it. Far away, Daniel stood in a room full of people later that night, voices blending into a noise he couldn't quite focus on. Someone was speaking to him. He nodded at the right moments, responded when necessary. But his mind wasn't there. It drifted back to a quiet room. A soft voice, a question he hadn't answered honestly. "You're happy, right?" For the first time. He wasn't sure what the answer was anymore. Morning didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like something unfinished. Elena woke before the sun had fully risen, her body stiff from a night that hadn't really been sleep. Her eyes opened slowly, not because she was rested, but because her mind had already started again. The memory didn't hit her all at once. It came in pieces. The photo, the dress, his smile. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. Still there, still real. Everything else felt uncertain, but this didn't. She sat up carefully, the quiet of the house wrapping around her again like something she hadn't agreed to but couldn't escape. For a brief second, just a second, she reached for her phone. Not consciously, not intentionally, just habit. As if there might be a message waiting this time, an explanation, a correction. This isn't what it looks like. But the screen was empty. No missed calls, no new messages, nothing. Across the world, Daniel was already awake too. Not because he had slept well, but because sleep had refused to stay. He stood on the balcony, the early city air cool against his skin, his hands resting against the railing as he stared out at a skyline that should have felt like possibility. Instead, it felt like distance. Behind him, the sliding door opened. "You didn't come to bed." Sophia's voice was softer this time, less sharp, almost careful. "I did," he replied without turning. "For an hour," she said, stepping beside him. "That doesn't count." He gave a faint nod, like he accepted the correction, but didn't have the energy to respond to it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was observant. "You're thinking about going back, aren't you?" The question landed gently, but it carried weight. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." He exhaled slowly, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "It's not that simple." Sophia crossed her arms lightly, studying him. "It wasn't simple when you left either." That was true, and he knew it. But he also knew something else. Something he hadn't said out loud yet. Leaving had felt easier than staying, at least at the time. Back in the house, Elena stood in the kitchen, staring at the kettle as it heated. The sound was small, ordinary. But today, everything ordinary felt different. She used to make tea for two. Now she made it for one. She reached for a second cup out of habit, then paused. Her hand hovered for a moment before slowly placing it back. That small action, so simple, so insignificant, hit harder than anything else had so far. Because it wasn't dramatic. It was real. The kettle clicked. She poured the water carefully, watching the steam rise as if it might carry something with it, some clarity, some direction, but it didn't. It just faded. Like everything else, her phone buzzed again. This time, she hesitated before picking it up. A part of her didn't want to look, because looking meant confirming that he still hadn't reached out. But she picked it up anyway. Another message. You need to talk to him. She stared at it, then slowly typed back. There's nothing to say. She didn't send it immediately. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Because the truth was, there was something to say. There were 1,000 things to say. Questions, anger, confusion. But none of them felt like they would change anything. So instead, she deleted the message, locked her phone, and placed it face down on the counter. Miles away, Daniel finally turned away from the balcony. I have meetings today, he said, his tone shifting back into something more structured, controlled. Sophia nodded. Of course you do. But there was something in her expression, something that suggested she understood more than he was saying. Daniel, she said after a moment, her voice quieter now, you don't get to live in 2 places at once. He paused, not because he disagreed, but because he knew she was right. You left a life, she continued. You don't get to halfway stay in it when it's convenient. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, something about her felt different, not worse, not better, just clearer. She wasn't the escape anymore. She was part of the reality now. Back home, Elena sat down slowly at the table, her tea untouched. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway, toward the bedroom, toward the space that still held his presence even in his absence. She hadn't gone back in there since last night, not fully, not intentionally, because walking into that room meant facing something she wasn't ready to name yet. But avoidance had its limits, and she could feel that limit approaching. She stood up again, slowly, deliberately. Each step toward the bedroom felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of what she already knew she would find. Nothing new, just everything unchanged. The door creaked softly as she pushed it open. The bed was still made, his side untouched, his clothes still in the closet, his watch still on the dresser. Everything looked exactly the same, and somehow, that made it worse. She walked further in, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the dresser. Then she stopped. Her eyes landed on something she hadn't noticed before, an empty space, where something used to be. She frowned slightly, stepping closer. It was subtle, but it was there. A missing watch, a few missing shirts, things he had taken. Not everything, just enough. And in that moment, it clicked. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't impulsive. This had been planned, quietly, carefully. While she was still living inside a version of their life that had already ended for him, her hand tightened slightly against the dresser. Not out of anger, but out of realization. A deeper kind of understanding. He didn't leave yesterday, she said softly to herself. Her voice was calm, steady. He left a long time ago. And for the first time, that truth didn't break her. It grounded her, because now, at least, she wasn't standing in confusion anymore. She was standing in reality. Across the ocean, Daniel sat at a long conference table, voices moving around him, numbers being discussed, decisions being made. He responded when needed, spoke when expected, but his mind wasn't there. It kept drifting, back to a house that was too quiet, a woman who hadn't called, hadn't messaged, hadn't demanded answers. That was what unsettled him the most. Not anger, not confrontation, silence. Because silence didn't give him anything to react to. It didn't give him a way to defend himself, or explain, or justify. It just existed. And in that silence, his choices felt louder than ever. His phone sat on the table in front of him, face down. Still, he hadn't checked it in hours. Not because he didn't want to, but because he already knew what he would find. Nothing. And somehow, that nothing felt heavier than anything else. Back in the bedroom, Elena sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. Her hand rested once again on her stomach. This time, not out of instinct, but intention. I can't wait for him, she whispered. Not with bitterness, not with anger, just clarity. Because waiting meant staying in a place that no longer existed. And she could feel it now. Quiet, steady, unfamiliar, but real. The beginning of something else. Not closure, not healing, but movement. And sometimes, movement is where strength begins. If this chapter touched something in you, if you've ever felt the quiet pain of being left without answers, take a moment to reflect. Would you have reached out to him? Or would you choose silence like Elena did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear your perspective. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories that show the reality of love, choices, and consequences, don't forget to like and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Follow the journey, because what happens next will change everything Elena thought she understood about love, and everything Daniel thought he could escape. The city looked beautiful from a distance, lights stretching endlessly, movement without pause, a rhythm that didn't wait for anyone. Daniel used to love that about places like this, the way everything felt alive. The way nothing stayed still long enough for you to think too deeply about anything. But now, standing by the window again, watching the same view he had admired just days ago, something about it felt different. It wasn't the city that changed. It was him. "You're doing that thing again." Sophia's voice came from behind him, softer this time, but familiar. Daniel didn't turn immediately. "What thing?" "Staring like you're somewhere else." He let out a quiet breath. "Maybe the first AM. She walked closer, stopping just a few steps behind him. "You've been somewhere else a lot lately." He didn't deny it, didn't explain it either, because he didn't fully understand it himself. When he first arrived here, everything felt clear, simple. He told himself he had made a decision, that he had chosen a life that felt more aligned with who he was becoming. No pressure, no expectations, no constant reminders of responsibility waiting at home. Just space. Freedom. But freedom, he was starting to realize, had a strange side to it. At first, it felt like relief. Then, it felt like distance. And now, it felt like something he couldn't quite define. Sophia stepped beside him, her arms folded loosely. "We have dinner tonight with the investors. Don't forget." "I won't. You said that yesterday." He glanced at her briefly, then back at the city. "I'll be there." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." But she didn't move. "Do you regret it?" The question came out calmly. No accusation, no emotion attached to it. Just direct. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "Regret what?" She raised an eyebrow. "You know what?" He didn't answer right away, because the truth was, he didn't have a clean answer. Not yet. Back home, Elena stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the soft fabric of her dress. It wasn't anything special, just something comfortable enough for her doctor's appointment. Her reflection looked the same as it had yesterday, but she didn't feel the same. There was something steadier in her posture now, something quieter in her expression. Not stronger, not fully, but less fragile. She picked up her bag, pausing briefly as her eyes drifted across the room. Everything still held his presence, but it no longer pulled at her the same way. It was still there, but it didn't define the moment anymore. The drive to the clinic felt longer than usual, or maybe she was just more aware of it now. Every red light, every turn, every passing moment. She noticed things she normally wouldn't. A mother walking with her child, a couple laughing at a corner cafe, a man holding a bouquet of flowers, life moving forward, uninterrupted. And for a second, she wondered if hers would too. At the clinic, the waiting room was quiet, soft voices, occasional footsteps, the distant hum of medical equipment behind closed doors. Elena sat down carefully, her hands resting in her lap. She wasn't nervous, not about the appointment, but about the absence. "First baby?" The voice came from beside her. She turned slightly, noticing an older woman smiling gently. Elena hesitated for a brief moment, then nodded. "Yes, that's always the most special," the woman said warmly. "Are you excited?" The question lingered, simple, innocent, but not easy to answer. Elena gave a small smile. "I'm learning to be." The woman nodded, as if she understood more than Elena had said. "Sometimes it takes time," she replied, "but it always finds its way." Across the ocean, Daniel sat in a meeting room, the conversation around him focused, strategic, forward-moving, numbers, expansion, growth, everything he had worked for, everything he had built, everything that used to define him. Daniel. He blinked slightly, realizing the room had gone quiet. All eyes were on him. "Your thoughts?" someone asked. He straightened slightly, adjusting his posture. "I think we move forward with the proposal." Confident, decisive, exactly what they expected from him. The meeting continued, but his mind didn't stay. It drifted again, back to something quieter, something slower, something he had left behind. "Are you even listening?" Sophia's voice cut through the noise later that evening as they sat across from each other at dinner. The restaurant was elegant, perfectly lit, exactly the kind of place that symbolized success. "I am," Daniel replied, though his tone lacked conviction. She leaned back slightly, studying him. "Then what did I just say?" He paused, and that pause said everything. Sophia let out a soft breath, shaking her head. "You're here, but you're not here." He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "I told you, I have a lot on my mind." "And I told you," she said calmly, "that you don't get to disappear emotionally and expect everything to feel normal." There it was again, reality, not sharp, not explosive, but undeniable. Back at the clinic, Elena lay back as the doctor prepared for the scan. The room dimmed slightly. The soft sound of the machine filled the space. "Ready?" the doctor asked gently. Elena nodded. And then, a sound, faint, fast, steady. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened slightly as she listened. The heartbeat, her baby's heartbeat. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The silence, the betrayal, The absence, none of it mattered in that exact second. Because this was real. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something grounding, something undeniable. "Everything looks good," the doctor said with a reassuring smile. Elena nodded, unable to speak right away, because for the first time since everything happened, she felt something shift. Not pain, not loss, but purpose. Across the world, Daniel sat alone in the car after dinner, his phone resting in his hand. The screen lit up, a notification. He hesitated, just for a second, then unlocked it. A photo, sent by someone he hadn't expected. Elena, at the clinic, her hand resting gently on her stomach. A quiet expression on her face. He stared at it longer than he intended. Something in his chest tightened, not sharply, but steadily, because for the first time, the distance didn't feel like freedom. It felt like separation, real, irreversible, and suddenly, he wasn't sure what he had actually gained. Daniel didn't reply to the photo. He just stared at it, longer than he should have, long enough for the screen to dim once, then again, but each time, his thumb tapped it back to life, as if letting it go dark meant letting the moment pass. And something in him wasn't ready for that. She looked different, not physically, but in a way he couldn't immediately explain. There was no trace of panic, no visible sadness, no sign of the emotional weight he expected her to be carrying. Instead, she looked calm, grounded, present, and that unsettled him more than anything else. Because, in his mind, he had imagined something else entirely. Anger, messages, calls, something that forced him to respond, something that gave him a role in the aftermath. But this silence, it removed him from the center of it. "Are you going to keep looking at that, or are you going to talk to me?" Sophia's voice pulled him back. He hadn't even noticed when she got into the car. Daniel locked his phone, placing it face down on his lap. "It's nothing." She glanced at the phone briefly, then back at him. "It doesn't look like nothing." He didn't answer, because there was no simple explanation for what he was feeling. Sophia leaned back into her seat, crossing her arms lightly. "You saw her, didn't you?" Daniel's grip tightened slightly around the edge of the phone. "Someone sent me a picture, and..." He exhaled slowly. "She's fine." The words felt strange coming out, uncertain, incomplete. Sophia turned her head, studying him carefully. "You don't sound convinced." "I didn't say I wasn't. You didn't say you were either." Silence filled the space between them. Not hostile, but heavy. "She's pregnant, Daniel." The statement landed quietly, but it carried everything. Responsibility, reality, consequence. "I know," he said, his voice lower now. "Do you?" Sophia asked gently. "Or do you just know it as a fact, not as something you're actually part of?" That question lingered longer than the others, because this time, he didn't have an answer at all. Back home, Elena stepped out of the clinic into the open air, pausing for a moment as the sunlight touched her face. It felt warmer than she expected, or maybe she just noticed it more. She took a slow breath, her hand resting lightly on her stomach again. The sound of the heartbeat still echoed in her mind. Steady, alive, certain. For the first time in days, her thoughts weren't centered around him. They were centered around something else, someone else. She walked toward her car, her steps unhurried, not because she had nowhere to go, but because she didn't feel the need to rush anymore. Inside the car, she sat quietly for a moment before starting the engine. Her phone rested in the cup holder, face up, still silent. She glanced at it briefly, not with expectation, just acknowledgement. Then she looked away, started the car. Miles away, Daniel sat in the same position, the engine still off, the city moving around him while he remained still. Sophia had gone quiet, not out of frustration, but out of understanding. "You should call her." Her voice was softer now, different from before, less confrontational, more real. Daniel shook his head slightly. "What would I even say?" "The truth." He let out a quiet breath. "It's not that simple." "It never is," she replied. "But avoiding it doesn't make it easier." He looked down at his phone again, the image still there, frozen. A moment he wasn't part of. "She didn't call me," he said finally. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Sophia's expression shifted slightly. "Why would she?" He frowned. "Because..." He stopped, because even he didn't know how to finish that sentence. "Because she's your wife?" Sophia offered gently. The word hung in the air. Wife. Not past tense. Not replaced. Not erased. Daniel leaned back slightly, running a hand over his face. "I didn't expect her to just disappear." Sophia tilted her head. "She didn't disappear, Daniel." He looked at her. "She just stopped chasing you." That hit differently, because it forced him to see something he hadn't fully considered. Elena wasn't silent because she was weak. She was silent because she had stepped back. And that shift, that quiet withdrawal, it changed everything. Back home, Elena stopped at a small store on her way back. Nothing fancy, just somewhere to pick up a few things. She moved through the aisles slowly, scanning shelves without much thought, until her eyes landed on something small, a baby onesie, soft, simple, tiny. Her hand reached out before she could stop herself. She picked it up, holding it gently between her fingers. For a moment, her expression softened, not with sadness, but with something else, something warmer. "This is cute." The voice came from beside her. She turned slightly, noticing another woman smiling at the same item. Elena nodded faintly. "It is... first one?" the woman asked. Elena paused, then nodded again. "Yes. You'll never forget these moments," the woman said warmly, "even the hard ones." Elena looked down at the small piece of fabric in her hands, then back up, a quiet understanding passing through her. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I'm starting to realize that." She placed the onesie into her basket, not because everything was okay, but because something was moving forward. Across the world, Daniel finally unlocked his phone again. His thumb hovered over her contact. His chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from uncertainty, because calling her meant facing something real, something final, something he could no longer avoid once it was spoken out loud. Sophia watched him quietly. She didn't interrupt, didn't push, because she understood something now too. This wasn't just about her, it never had been. Daniel stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly, he locked the phone again. "I'll call her later," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, they didn't feel true, because deep down, he wasn't ready to hear what her silence might sound like when it finally broke. Back home, Elena stepped into the house, placing her keys down gently. The quiet greeted her again, familiar now, less heavy than before. She moved through the space slowly, setting her bag aside before lowering herself onto the couch. Her hand rested once more on her stomach. This time, she smiled, small, soft, but real. "I've got you," she whispered, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone. The nights were the hardest, not because they were loud, but because they weren't. Silence has a way of making everything clearer than you want it to be. Elena lay on her side, eyes open, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling as the dim light from outside slipped through the curtains. Her hand rested over her stomach, rising and falling gently with each breath. Sleep came in pieces now, short, unsteady, easily broken by thoughts she didn't invite, but couldn't stop. It wasn't the image anymore, not the wedding photo, not even the realization of what he had done. That part had already settled into something quieter, something more accepted. What lingered now were the in-between moments, the memories that didn't feel painful at first glance, but became heavier the longer she sat with them. Like the way he used to check the doors before bed. Always the same routine. Always the same quiet attention to detail. Not because he had to, but because he cared. Or the way he would pause mid-conversation just to look at her, like he was trying to memorize something. She used to tease him about it. "Why are you staring at me like that?" He'd smile slightly, "Just making sure you're real." Those moments didn't feel like lies. That was the confusing part. They felt real, genuine, whole, and that made everything harder to understand. Because if those moments were real, then when did they stop being enough? Elena closed her eyes briefly, exhaling slowly. She had asked herself that question too many times already, and each time it led her to the same place, no answer. So instead of asking it again, she shifted. Her hand moved gently, tracing a small circle over her stomach, grounding herself in something that didn't come with confusion, something that didn't require interpretation, something that simply was, "I'm still here," she whispered softly. And this time, it wasn't about him. Morning came quietly. No rush, no urgency, just light slowly filling the room, until staying in bed didn't feel necessary anymore. Elena sat up carefully, adjusting to the weight she carried. Not just physically, but in the way her body had started to move more deliberately now. Everything had slowed, not in a bad way, just intentionally. She made her way to the kitchen, the familiar routine returning in small steps. Kettle, cup, tea, but today felt slightly different, not easier, just clearer. She stood by the counter, waiting for the water to heat, when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, paused, then picked it up. An unknown number. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, because lately, anything unexpected felt like something she wasn't ready for, but something told her to answer. "Hello? Hi. Is this Elena?" The voice was calm, professional. "Yes, it is. This is Claire from your husband's office." Elena's grip on the phone tightened slightly. Not visibly, but enough. "I'm sorry to call like this," Claire continued, But there are a few documents that require your signature. Some changes were made before he left, and legally, we need your acknowledgement. There it was. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not even his voice. Paperwork. Elena's expression didn't change. But something inside her shifted. Again. What kind of changes? She asked quietly. A brief pause. Then, financial restructuring. Asset redistribution. Nothing alarming, but it's important you review everything carefully. Carefully. I'll come by, Elena said. Her voice was steady, more steady than she expected it to be. Of course. We'll be expecting you. The call ended. Elena lowered the phone slowly, placing it on the counter. The kettle clicked off, but she didn't move to pour the water. Because, now, there was something else to process. He hadn't just left, he had prepared to leave. Not emotionally, practically, and, somehow, that felt heavier. Across the world, Daniel sat alone in his office. The door closed. The noise of the outside world muted. His desk was filled with documents, contracts, plans, numbers, everything he had spent years building, everything that used to feel like control. But today, it felt like something else, a distraction. He leaned back slightly, staring at nothing in particular. His mind wasn't on the numbers. It wasn't even on the business. It was on something much quieter, much further away. A house, a woman, a child he hadn't met. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Sophia stepped inside, closing the door behind her. You missed another call. He didn't ask who it was, because lately, he had a feeling. I saw, he said. She walked closer, placing a file on his desk. You can't keep ignoring everything that connects you to your past and expect it to stay quiet forever. Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. I'm not ignoring it. Sophia raised an eyebrow slightly. Then what are you doing? He didn't answer, because he didn't have the right word for it. Avoiding? Delaying? Hoping it would somehow resolve itself without him having to face it. None of them sounded right, but all of them felt true. Back home, Elena stood in front of the office building, her reflection faintly visible in the glass doors. She hadn't been here in months, not since things started to feel distant. She took a slow breath, then stepped inside. The atmosphere was the same, clean, professional, unchanged. But the way she walked through it wasn't. People greeted her politely, some with surprise, some with quiet sympathy they tried not to show too clearly. She noticed, but she didn't react. Claire met her halfway down the hallway. Elena, thank you for coming. Elena nodded. You said there were documents. Claire gestured toward a nearby office. Yes. Let's sit. Inside, the room felt smaller than she expected. Or maybe it was just the weight of what she already knew. Claire placed a folder in front of her. Everything is outlined here. Take your time. Elena opened it slowly. Page after page. Numbers, signatures, dates. Her eyes moved carefully across each line, not rushing, not skipping, until something caught her attention. A date, weeks ago. Her fingers paused on the page. That was before he left, before the silence, before the distance became visible, which meant he had already decided. Back then, while sitting beside her, while asking about the baby, while pretending everything was still whole, Elena closed the folder gently, not with anger, not with frustration, but with clarity. He didn't leave suddenly, she said quietly. Claire hesitated, unsure how to respond. Elena looked up, her expression calm, grounded, different. He just waited until I didn't see it anymore. And in that moment, something inside her settled completely, not because it stopped hurting, but because it finally made sense. And sometimes, understanding doesn't fix the pain, but it changes how you carry it. Elena didn't sign the papers right away. She closed the folder gently and let her hands rest on top of it, as if pressing down on something that needed time to settle. Not the documents, but the realization beneath them. Claire watched her quietly. You can take them home, if you prefer. Elena shook her head slightly. No. I'll go through everything now. Her voice wasn't rushed. It wasn't emotional either. It was careful. She opened the folder again. This time, slower, more intentional. Each page told a story she hadn't been part of. Accounts rearranged. Assets moved. Legal language that softened the reality of what had actually happened. He didn't just leave. He prepared a life without her. But what stood out the most wasn't the money. It wasn't the numbers or the signatures. It was the absence of hesitation. Everything had been done cleanly, strategically, as if he had made peace with the decision long before she ever knew it existed. Elena leaned back slightly in her chair, exhaling through her nose. Not in frustration, but in acknowledgement. Claire cleared her throat gently. If you have any questions, I can explain. I understand it, Elena interrupted softly. And she did. Not just the documents, but the meaning behind them. Her fingers traced lightly along the edge of the page before she turned it. Then another, until she reached the final section, a line waiting for her signature. She paused, not because she was unsure, but because she was aware. Signing this wasn't just legal, it was symbolic. It meant accepting that the version of her life she had been holding on to was already over. For a brief moment, her hand hovered above the pen. Then she picked it up, not impulsively, not reluctantly, but deliberately. She signed, and just like that, something quiet shifted inside her. Not closure, not relief, but direction. She placed the pen down and closed the folder again, sliding it gently back toward Claire. "I'm done." Claire nodded, her expression softening. "If you need anything, I'll be fine," Elena said. And for the first time, that wasn't something she said just to sound strong. She stood up slowly, adjusting her bag over her shoulder. Every movement grounded, measured. As she walked toward the door, Claire spoke again. "Elena." She paused, turning slightly. "I just want to say, you're handling this better than most people would." Elena held her gaze for a moment, then gave a small, almost thoughtful nod. "I don't think this is about handling it well," she said quietly. Claire frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Elena's eyes softened just a little. "I think it's about realizing you don't have a choice but to keep moving." And with that, she left. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just clearer. She walked down the steps slowly, her hand resting once again on her stomach. The same instinct, but now it carried something more intentional, because, for the first time, she wasn't reacting to what had happened. She was responding to what needed to happen next. Across the world, Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at a message he hadn't expected to receive. "The documents have been signed." That was it. No questions, no comments, no emotion, just confirmation. His eyes lingered on the screen, then read it again. "Signed." A strange feeling settled in his chest. Not sharp, not overwhelming, but undeniable. Because somehow, that single word felt more final than anything else so far. He leaned back in his chair slowly, exhaling under his breath. His mind moved quickly, but not clearly. He had expected something else. Resistance, delay, a call, something that required him to respond. But she didn't give him that. She didn't reach for him at all. And now, he didn't know where he stood. The door opened quietly. Sophia stepped in, pausing when she noticed his expression. "What happened?" Daniel didn't look up immediately. "She signed everything." Sophia nodded once, processing that. "Okay." But when he didn't say anything else, she stepped further in. "That's what you wanted, right?" He didn't answer right away, because suddenly, he wasn't sure. "It just feels—" He started, then stopped. "Like what?" she asked. He looked up at her then, "Like I don't exist in her life anymore." The words surprised even him. Sophia studied him carefully. "You walked out of it, Daniel." "I know," he said quickly. "Then why does it feel like she closed the door?" That question lingered, because it revealed something deeper, something he hadn't admitted until now. He didn't just expect to leave. He expected to still matter, even from a distance, even after everything. Sophia exhaled slowly, her tone soft but firm. "Because she's not waiting for you." Silence filled the room, and this time, it didn't feel neutral. It felt like truth. Back home, Elena returned to the house just as the afternoon light began to soften. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her gently. The quiet greeted her again, but it didn't feel the same as before. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was still. She moved through the space slowly, not avoiding anything this time. Not the living room, not the hallway, not even the bedroom. Everything was still there, unchanged. But she wasn't. She paused in the middle of the room, her hand resting lightly against her stomach again. This time, she smiled a little more, not because everything was okay, but because something inside her had settled into place. "I think we're going to be all right," she whispered softly. And for the first time, she believed it, because she wasn't waiting anymore. And sometimes, that's where real strength begins. The first crack didn't sound like anything. It didn't come with raised voices or slammed doors. It came quietly, in the middle of something that was supposed to feel easy. "You're not even listening again." Sophia's voice wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. The calmness in it carried more weight than anger ever could. Daniel blinked slightly, his attention pulling back into the room like it had been called from somewhere far away. "I am," he said automatically. She didn't respond right away, just watched him, carefully. "Then what did I just say?" The question hung there, simple, direct, unavoidable. Daniel opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again, because he didn't know. Not really. Sophia let out a quiet breath, not frustrated, just certain. "That's what I thought." The restaurant around them continued as if nothing had happened. Soft music, low conversations, glasses clinking. Everything perfectly normal. But, at their table, something had shifted. "I've just had a long day," Daniel said, reaching for something to explain the distance. Sophia tilted her head slightly. "You've had a long week." He didn't argue, because she wasn't wrong. But it wasn't about the week, or the work, or the meetings. It was something else, something he hadn't figured out how to say yet. Back home, Elena sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a small notebook open in front of her. The house was quiet, but not in the same way as before. This quiet felt productive. She had started writing things down. Not thoughts, not emotions. Plans, doctor appointments, baby essentials, budget adjustments, practical things. Things she could control. Her pen moved slowly across the page, her focus steady. Every now and then, her hand paused briefly over her stomach. Not out of habit anymore, but connection. "You're going to need a lot more than just love," she murmured softly. And it wasn't fear in her voice. It was preparation. Across the table, Sophia set her fork down gently. "You're somewhere else again." Daniel looked at her. This time more present, but not fully. "I'm here." "No," she said calmly. "You're physically here." There was no accusation, no raised tone, just honesty. And somehow, that made it harder to push back against. He leaned back slightly, exhaling. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." He gave a faint, tired smile. "I don't even know what that is right now." Sophia held his gaze. And for a moment, she didn't look like the woman who had once felt like an escape. She looked like someone standing in reality. "That's the problem," she said quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means you made a decision without fully understanding it." The words landed, not harsh, but precise. "And now," she continued, "you're living inside something you haven't fully accepted." He didn't respond, because somewhere inside, he knew she was right. Back in the quiet house, Elena stood in what used to be the guest room. The space felt unfamiliar, unused, but today, she saw it differently. Her eyes moved slowly across the room. The empty walls, the window, the corner, where nothing stood. Then her gaze softened slightly. "This could work," she whispered. Not with excitement, not yet, but with possibility. She stepped further in, her movements slow, thoughtful. This wasn't just a room anymore. It was a beginning. Across the ocean, Daniel stepped out of the restaurant, the cool night air hitting his face as he loosened his tie slightly. Sophia followed behind him, but she didn't speak immediately. They walked side by side for a few steps, silence stretching between them. Finally, "Are you happy?" The question stopped him, not physically, but internally, because he had heard it before, in a different place, in a different tone, from a different person. "Elena, you're happy, right?" He had answered back then, quickly, easily, without thinking too deeply about it. But now, standing in the middle of a life he had chosen, the answer didn't come so easily. "I thought I would be," he said finally. Sophia nodded slowly. "That's not what I asked." He looked at her, really looked at her, and, for the first time, there was no distraction, no escape, no avoidance, just the question, and the truth waiting behind it. Back home, Elena stood in the center of the empty room, her hand resting lightly on her stomach. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath, then opened them again. "I think we're going to build something new here," she said softly. And this time, there was something stronger in her voice. Not just survival, intention, because while one life had ended quietly, another was beginning, and unlike before, this one would not depend on someone else staying. Across the city lights, Daniel finally answered. "No," he said quietly, and for the first time, he didn't try to change the answer after saying it. "No," he said quietly. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It settled between them with a kind of weight that couldn't be softened or explained away. Sophia didn't react immediately. She just looked at him, not surprised, not hurt in a dramatic way, just aware. "Okay," she said after a moment. And somehow, that response carried more meaning than any argument could have. Daniel frowned slightly. "That's it? What else do you want me to say?" she asked calmly. He hesitated, because part of him expected resistance, emotion, something that made the moment feel bigger. But she didn't give him that. "You said you're not happy," she continued, her tone steady. "I'm not going to argue with how you feel." "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Then what did you mean?" He opened his mouth, then stopped, because he didn't know how to explain something he hadn't fully understood himself. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I thought this would feel different." Sophia nodded once. "Better?" "Yes." She studied him for a moment before responding. Different doesn't always mean better, Daniel. That landed because it stripped away the illusion he had been holding on to, the idea that change alone would fix what he felt inside. But now, standing in the middle of that change, he was starting to see something clearer. He hadn't escaped anything. He had just carried it somewhere else. Back home, Elena stood in the same room, now with a small measuring tape in her hand. The space looked the same, empty, plain, but her perspective had shifted. She moved slowly along the wall, measuring, noting small details in her mind. Where the crib could go, where the chair might fit, where light came in strongest. Each step wasn't just practical, it was purposeful. This wasn't about filling a room. It was about creating something stable, something safe, something that wouldn't disappear. She paused near the window, her hand resting lightly against the frame. For a brief moment, a thought passed through her. He should have been here, not out of longing, not out of sadness, just truth. But instead of holding on to it, she let it pass, because reality didn't change based on what should have happened. It moved based on what was happening now. Across the city, Daniel leaned against the car, his gaze unfocused as traffic moved around them. Sophia stood nearby, giving him space, but not distance. So what now? She asked quietly. The question wasn't about tonight. It wasn't about dinner or plans. It was about everything. Daniel exhaled slowly. I don't know. Sophia nodded. I figured. He glanced at her. You don't seem surprised. I'm not, she said simply. You've been unsure since the moment you got here. That wasn't entirely true. At first, he had been certain, clear, confident in the decision. But certainty had a way of fading when reality replaced imagination. I thought I needed something different, he said. Sophia tilted her head slightly. And now? He hesitated. Now I think I didn't understand what I already had. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but honest. Sophia looked away briefly, then back at him. That realization usually comes late, she said. Daniel didn't respond, because there was nothing to argue. She wasn't wrong. Back home, Elena sat on the floor of the room again, this time with her notebook open. New notes filled the page. Colors, furniture, essentials. But in between the practical details, there were small words. Safe, calm, warm, not for decoration, for intention. Because she wasn't just preparing a space, she was shaping an environment. One that felt different from what she had just lost. One that wouldn't rely on uncertainty. Her hand moved slowly as she wrote, then paused. Her eyes softened slightly as she looked down at the page. I want you to grow up feeling secure, she whispered. Not as a promise, as a decision. Across the ocean, Daniel finally pushed himself off the car slightly, straightening his posture. I think I need to go back, he said. The words came out quieter than expected, but they were clear. Sophia didn't react right away. She took a moment, processing. Back to her? She asked. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. To face what I left. That answer mattered, because it wasn't about running back. It was about confronting something unfinished. Sophia nodded slowly. That makes sense. There was no bitterness in her tone, no anger, just acceptance, which, somehow, made the moment feel more real. You're not asking me to come with you, she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel looked at her, then shook his head slightly. No. And in that moment, they both understood something. This wasn't just about distance anymore. It was about direction. Back home, Elena stood once more in the center of the room, the notebook now closed. The ideas settled. She took a slow breath, then turned toward the door, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving, because for the first time, her steps weren't guided by what she lost. They were guided by what she was building. Across the city lights, Daniel looked up at the skyline one more time. It still looked the same, but now, he saw it differently, not as freedom, but as something temporary, because the real weight of his life was waiting somewhere else, and this time, he wasn't going to pretend he didn't see it. This chapter shows something many people don't realize until it's too late. Sometimes what we think we're missing isn't actually missing. We just stopped appreciating it. If you were in Daniel's position, would you go back and face what you left behind? Or keep moving forward and never look back? And if you were Elena, would you even allow that door to open again? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else going through something similar. If stories like this speak to you, real, emotional, and filled with life lessons, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Follow the journey, because what happens next will test not just love, but accountability. The change didn't happen all at once. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't loud. It didn't come with a moment where Elena woke up and felt completely different. It happened in small decisions, quiet ones, the kind no one else would notice. Like waking up and not checking her phone first. Like making breakfast without leaving a second plate on the counter out of habit. Like walking past memories, without stopping to sit in them. It wasn't that the pain disappeared. It just stopped controlling her every move. That morning, sunlight filled the kitchen more warmly than usual. Or maybe she was just more present to feel it. Elena stood by the stove, stirring slowly. Her movements calm, steady. There was no rush, no heaviness, just rhythm. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, paused, then continued stirring. Only after she finished did she wipe her hands and pick it up. A message from a number she knew, but hadn't seen in weeks. Daniel. Her thumb hovered over the screen, not out of shock, not out of excitement, but awareness, because she already knew. This moment would come eventually. She opened the message. Elena, I think we need to talk. She read it once, then again. Her expression didn't change. No visible emotion, no reaction, just stillness. Across the world, Daniel sat in his office, his phone in his hand, staring at the message he had just sent. His heart wasn't racing, but it wasn't steady either. This wasn't like any decision he had made before, because this one didn't come from impulse or escape. It came from realization, and realization was harder to act on than avoidance. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk, waiting for a response, for something, for anything. But time passed, minutes, then more, and still, nothing. Back in the kitchen, Elena placed the phone back down, face down, not as rejection, not as punishment, but as control, because for the first time, she didn't feel the need to respond immediately. She moved toward the table, sitting down slowly, her hand resting lightly on her stomach. I knew this would happen, she whispered, not with bitterness, but with clarity, because people often return. When they finally understand what they lost, the question wasn't if he would reach out. The question was what it would mean when he did. Across the ocean, Daniel stood up from his desk, pacing slowly. His mind ran through possibilities. Maybe she hadn't seen it. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she didn't know what to say. Or maybe she had seen it and chose not to answer. That thought settled heavier than the others, because silence meant something different now. It didn't mean confusion. It meant choice. Back home, Elena stood up again, carrying her plate to the sink. The routine grounded her. Everything she did now felt more intentional, more controlled, more hers. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't turn immediately this time, but when she did, she saw another message. I'm coming back. Her hand still slightly against the counter, not shaken, but aware, because that changed things, not emotionally, but practically. He wasn't just reaching out, he was stepping back into her reality, and that meant she would have to decide what place, if any, he still had in it. She picked up the phone again, read the message, then locked the screen. No response, not yet. Across the city, Daniel lowered his phone slowly. This time, he wasn't waiting for a reply, because sending that message wasn't about getting an answer. It was about making a decision, and for the first time, he had made one that didn't involve running away. Back in the quiet house, Elena walked toward the room she had started preparing. She paused at the doorway, looking inside. It was still empty, but not for long, because something inside her had changed completely now. She wasn't preparing for a future that depended on someone else. She was building one that depended on herself. Her hand rested gently on her stomach again. He's coming back, she said softly. Then, after a pause, that doesn't mean anything changes. And in that moment, that was the most important truth she had accepted. Because just because someone returns, doesn't mean they return to the same place they left. Daniel booked the flight that same night, not because it was convenient, but because waiting felt like another form of avoidance. The confirmation email sat open on his screen long after he finished reading it. Departure, early morning. Arrival, late afternoon. A timeline, a direction, a decision that couldn't be undone once it started. For a moment, he leaned back in his chair, staring at nothing in particular. The room around him felt familiar, but not in the way it used to. Not grounding, not comforting, temporary. That was the word that came to him. Everything here, the city, the apartment, even the life he thought he was building, suddenly felt like something he had stepped into, not something he truly belonged in. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Sophia stepped inside, her expression calm, composed, as always. But there was something quieter in her eyes now, something that had already accepted what hadn't been said out loud yet. You booked it, she said, not a question. Daniel nodded once. Yeah. A brief silence followed. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning. She nodded again, absorbing the timeline. That was fast. He gave a faint, almost tired smile. It needed to be. Sophia walked further into the room, stopping a few steps away from him. "I'm not going to ask you to stay," she said. Daniel looked at her. There was no bitterness in her voice, no attempt to hold on to something that had already started slipping. "I know," he replied. She crossed her arms lightly, not defensively, just thoughtfully. "You're not going back for closure," she continued. He hesitated. "No," he said finally. "Then why are you going back?" The question lingered, because this time it deserved an honest answer. "To take responsibility," he said quietly. Sophia held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "That's different," she said. And it was, because, for the first time, he wasn't chasing a feeling, he was facing a consequence. Back home, Elena sat on the couch, a small pile of baby clothes folded neatly beside her. The soft fabric rested between her fingers as she folded each piece with quiet care. Her movements were steady, focused, but her mind wasn't completely still, not restless, just aware of what was coming. She hadn't responded to his messages, not because she didn't see them, not because she didn't understand what they meant, but because she needed time, not to decide what to say, but to decide who she was now, because responding as the woman she used to be was no longer an option. Her hand paused briefly over her stomach. "He's coming back," she whispered again. This time, it sounded different, less like a statement, more like preparation, because this wasn't just about seeing him again. It was about facing a version of her life she had already started moving away from. Across the ocean, Daniel stood in the apartment one last time. His suitcase rested by the door, packed, closed. He looked around slowly. The space was clean, perfect, exactly how it had been since the day he arrived. But now, it felt empty, not physically, emotionally. Sophia stood near the window, watching him without interrupting. "You don't look relieved," she said after a moment. "I'm not," he replied honestly. She nodded slightly. "That makes sense." He glanced at her. "Why?" "Because relief comes when something is over," she said. Then after a pause, "And this is just beginning." That settled in quietly, because she was right. This wasn't an ending. It was the start of something much harder. Back home, Elena stood in the nursery doorway again. The space had changed slightly, a few items now placed carefully. A beginning, not complete, not perfect, but real. She stepped inside slowly, her hand brushing lightly against the edge of the crib she had assembled earlier that day. Her movements were gentle, intentional. Everything she did now carried meaning, because she understood something she hadn't before. Stability isn't given, it's built, piece by piece, choice by choice. Across the city, Daniel picked up his suitcase, his hand pausing briefly on the handle, not from hesitation, but from awareness, because stepping out of that apartment meant stepping back into something he had left unfinished, something he could no longer avoid. Sophia moved toward the door, opening it for him. "You should go," she said softly. He nodded once, then paused. "Thank you," he added. She gave a small, almost knowing smile. "For what?" He thought about it for a second. "For being honest with me, even when I wasn't." Her expression softened slightly. "That's something you're going to need where you're going," she said. And with that, he stepped out. The door closed quietly behind him. Not dramatically, not forcefully, just final. Back home, Elena turned off the light in the nursery, stepping back into the hallway. The house was quiet again, but now, it felt different, not empty. Prepared, she walked slowly toward the living room, her hand resting once more on her stomach. This time, her expression was calm, grounded, ready, because whatever came next, she wouldn't face it as the woman he left behind. She would face it as the woman she had become. And that changed everything. The pain didn't start all at once. It began as a tightness, low, uncertain, easy to dismiss. Elena stood in the kitchen, one hand resting against the counter as she paused mid-step. Her breath slowed slightly. She waited. Maybe it was nothing, just another discomfort, another change her body had been adjusting to. But then it came again, stronger this time, more defined. Her fingers curled slightly against the edge of the counter. Her eyes closed for a brief second, and in that moment, she knew, not fear, not panic, just recognition. "It's time," she whispered. The words felt unreal, not because she wasn't ready, but because this moment had existed only in anticipation, until now. And suddenly, it was here. Across the city, Daniel stepped off the plane, the noise of the airport surrounding him instantly. Announcements, footsteps, voices layered over each other, but none of it fully registered, because his mind was already ahead of him, on a house, a door, a conversation he had rehearsed in fragments but never fully formed. He moved through the crowd quickly, his grip firm on his suitcase. Every step forward felt heavier, Not physically, but mentally, because this wasn't just a return, it was a confrontation. Back home, Elena leaned against the wall, her breathing controlled but deeper now. Another wave passed through her, stronger, longer. She reached for her phone with steady hands, not shaking, not rushed, prepared. She dialed, "Hi, I think I'm in labor." Her voice was calm, clear, even as her body began to shift into something far more intense. "Okay, Elena," the nurse's voice responded gently. "I need you to stay calm. Is there someone with you?" A brief pause. Elena glanced around the quiet house. "No," she said, not with sadness, just truth. "That's okay," the nurse reassured. "We're going to guide you. Can you get to the hospital?" Elena took a slow breath. Yes. Across the city, Daniel stepped into the car he had arranged, giving the driver the address without hesitation. His heart beat slightly faster now, not from the flight, not from exhaustion, but from proximity, because, for the first time, he was close to everything he had left behind. Back home, Elena moved carefully through the house, grabbing her bag, already packed, already prepared. Each movement was deliberate, measured. She paused briefly in the living room, not out of emotion, but out of awareness. This was the last time she would leave this house. As just herself, the next time she returned, everything would be different. Another contraction came, stronger. Her breath hitched slightly. Her hand pressed firmly against her stomach. "Okay," she whispered. "We're doing this." Not scared, focused. Across the road, Daniel's car moved steadily through traffic, the city passing by in blurred motion. His phone rested in his hand, unlocked, her contact open. He had thought about calling more than once, but something stopped him. Not fear, something else, uncertainty. Because calling meant hearing her voice, and hearing her voice meant facing something real, something he couldn't control. Back on the road, Elena drove carefully, her focus sharp despite the pain building in waves. Each red light felt longer, each turn more deliberate. Her breathing filled the car. Slow, controlled. She wasn't thinking about him. Not in this moment. There was no space for that. Because right now, everything centered on one thing: getting through this. Across the city, Daniel leaned forward slightly in his seat. "How much longer?" he asked. "About 20 minutes, the driver replied. Daniel nodded, but his leg bounced slightly, restless, because something didn't feel right. He couldn't explain it, just a sense that something was already happening. Back at the hospital entrance, Elena stepped out of her car, her body moving slower now. Another contraction. She paused, gripping the door for support. A nurse rushed forward. "Are you, Elena?" She nodded, unable to speak for a second. "Let's get you inside." They guided her carefully through the doors, into bright lights and controlled urgency. Everything moved quickly now. Voices, instructions, movement. But through it all, Elena remained focused. Not overwhelmed, not afraid, just present. Across the city, Daniel's phone buzzed suddenly in his hand. He frowned slightly, looking down. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Is this Daniel?" His posture straightened instantly. "Yes. This is City General Hospital. Your wife has been admitted. She's in labor." The world around him went quiet. Not physically, but internally. Everything narrowed into one moment. One realization. "I'm on my way," he said quickly. His voice was steady, but something deeper had shifted. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about facing the past anymore. This was about showing up. In the moment he had once walked away from. Back in the hospital room, Elena lay back, her breathing heavier now as another wave of pain passed through her. A nurse stood beside her. "You're doing really well," she said gently. Elena nodded slightly, her grip tightening on the sheets. Not from fear, from effort, from strength. And even in that moment, one truth remained clear. She had made it this far, on her own, and no matter what happened next, that would never change. The pain came in waves. Stronger now, closer together. No longer something she could pause through, only something she had to move with. Elena gripped the side of the bed, her breathing uneven but controlled, her body fully engaged in something deeper than thought. "Breathe with me," the nurse said gently. "You're doing well." Elena nodded faintly, not because it was easy, but because she understood something important in that moment. This wasn't something to resist, it was something to go through. Across the city, Daniel leaned forward in the car, his voice sharper now. "Can you go faster?" The driver glanced at him briefly through the mirror. "I'll do what I can." But traffic didn't move for urgency. It didn't adjust for regret. And for the first time, Daniel felt what it meant to be late to something that mattered. His hand tightened around his phone, his mind racing now, not with excuses, not with explanations, Just one thought. I should have been there already. Back in the hospital room, Elena's world had narrowed, not to the room, not to the people around her, but to her body, her breath, her strength. Almost there, the doctor said calmly. Another contraction hit, stronger than the last. Her breath broke slightly this time, a soft sound escaping before she could stop it. Her hand searched blindly for something to hold, and then a hand met hers, warm, firm, unexpected. Her eyes opened. Daniel. For a second, everything paused. Not the pain, not the moment, just recognition. He was there. His grip tightened slightly around her hand. "I'm here," he said. The words were simple, but they carried something different now. Not assumption, not certainty, effort. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and for a brief moment, there was no anger, no questions, no past, just the present. Then another contraction pulled her back in. Her grip tightened instinctively, and Daniel didn't pull away. "Stay with me," the nurse guided, and this time, he did. Across the room, everything moved with controlled urgency, voices steady, instructions clear, but between them, something unspoken settled. Not forgiveness, not understanding, just presence. Daniel didn't speak again. He didn't try to explain, didn't try to fix anything, because, for once, he understood that this moment wasn't about him. It was about showing up, and staying. Minutes stretched, time blurred. Then, push, the doctor instructed. Elena's breath hitched, her strength gathered, and she pushed, not just through pain, but through everything she had carried up to this point. The silence, the abandonment, the rebuilding, everything. Again, push. Daniel's hand remained steady in hers, not guiding, not controlling, just there. And this time, she didn't pull away. One final push. And then, a sound, small, sharp, alive, a cry. The room shifted instantly. Relief, movement, soft smiles. "It's a girl," the doctor said. Elena's head fell back slightly, her breath uneven, her body finally releasing the tension it had held. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes, not from pain, but from something deeper, because in that moment, everything changed. A nurse gently placed the baby against her chest. Tiny, warm, real. Elena's hands moved instinctively, holding her close, carefully, protectively. Her eyes softened completely. "Hi," she whispered, the word barely audible, but filled with something undeniable. Love. Across from her, Daniel stood still, watching, not as someone in control, not as someone who had answers, but as someone witnessing something he had almost missed entirely. His chest tightened, because, suddenly, everything became real in a way it hadn't before. Not the idea of a child, not the concept of responsibility, but this, her, their daughter. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully, not assuming, not imposing, just approaching. Elena didn't look at him immediately. Her focus remained on the baby, her hands steady, her expression calm. But after a moment, she glanced up. Their eyes met, and this time, there was no illusion between them, no confusion, just truth. "You made it," he said quietly. She held his gaze for a second, then nodded once. "I did, not we, Ersti." And that difference mattered, because it wasn't said with anger. It was said with clarity, and Daniel understood it. More than anything else she could have said. He nodded slowly. "I'm glad you weren't alone." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Elena's expression didn't change. She looked down at the baby again. "I wasn't," she said softly. And this time, it wasn't about him, because even when he wasn't there, she had found a way to stand, to carry, to become, and now, holding her daughter in her arms. She didn't need anything to complete that. The room grew quieter, not empty, just settled, because something new had begun, and while the past still existed, it no longer held the same power. The hospital room felt quieter the next morning, not empty, not heavy, just settled. Soft light filtered through the curtains, resting gently across the room as Elena sat upright in bed, her daughter asleep against her chest. Everything had slowed. No urgency, no noise, no pressure, just presence. Her fingers moved lightly over the baby's back, slow and careful, as if memorizing something that didn't need to be remembered. It already was. She hadn't slept much, but she didn't feel tired. There was something about this kind of exhaustion that felt different, not draining, fulfilling. Across the room, Daniel stood near the window, his hands in his pockets, his posture still. He had been there for a while, not speaking, not interrupting, just watching, not in a distant way, but in a quiet attempt to understand something he hadn't been part of until now. Elena hadn't asked him to leave, but she hadn't asked him to stay, either. And that space, between those two things, was where they now existed. She slept? He asked finally, his voice low. Elena nodded slightly, her eyes still on the baby. A little. Daniel gave a small nod. Then, silence returned. Not uncomfortable. Just careful, because neither of them was pretending this was normal. There was too much between them for that. After a moment, he stepped a little closer. Not too close. Just enough to see better. She's small, he said. Elena's lips curved slightly. Yeah. Another pause. Daniel looked down at the baby again, something shifting subtly in his expression. Can the first? He started, then hesitated. Elena looked up this time. Their eyes met. There was no anger in hers, no softness either, just assessment. Then slowly, she adjusted her arms slightly, not handing the baby over, but not refusing either. Daniel understood the gesture. He moved carefully, his hands uncertain at first as he took the baby into his arms. For a second, he froze, not out of fear, but out of realization. She was real, not an idea, not a responsibility waiting in the future. Here, now, his daughter. His hands adjusted slightly, instinct kicking in slowly. She's warm, he said quietly. Elena watched him, not closely, not intensely, but enough, because this moment mattered, not for what it fixed, but for what it revealed. Daniel looked down at the baby, something softening in his expression in a way Elena hadn't seen in a long time. She looks like you, he added. Elena didn't respond immediately. Then, she looks like herself, and that was intentional, because this wasn't about resemblance. It was about identity, something new, something separate, something that didn't belong to the past they shared. Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, she does. Silence settled again, but this time, it felt slightly different, less tense, more real. After a moment, Elena shifted slightly in the bed. We need to talk, she said. Not urgently, not emotionally, just clearly. Daniel looked up. He had expected those words, but now that they were here, they felt heavier than he imagined. He nodded once. Okay. Elena adjusted her posture, her hands resting lightly in her lap now. I'm not going to ask you why you left, she said. Daniel blinked slightly. That wasn't what he expected. Because I already understand something, she continued, her voice steady, grounded. You didn't leave suddenly. A pause. You left slowly. And I stayed in something that had already changed. Daniel swallowed slightly, because that was true, and hearing it said that clearly. Left no room for denial. I should have told you, he said quietly. Yes, she replied. No hesitation, no softness added, just agreement. And you didn't. The simplicity of it carried more weight than anger ever could. Daniel nodded again. I didn't handle it right, he admitted. Elena held his gaze, then asked, do you understand what that cost? The question wasn't sharp, but it went deeper than anything else she had said. Daniel hesitated, because the answer wasn't simple. But he tried. It cost us everything, he said. Elena's expression didn't change. Not just us, she said quietly. Her eyes moved briefly toward the baby, then back to him. You missed this. Not as an accusation, as truth. Daniel's grip tightened slightly around the baby, because that part, he couldn't undo. I know, he said, but knowing didn't change it. And they both understood that. Elena leaned back slightly, her posture still calm. I'm not angry, she said. That caught him off guard. Not because it didn't hurt, she added, a brief pause, but because I've already moved through that part. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw it clearly. She wasn't the same woman he left. Not emotionally, not mentally, not even in the way she carried herself. There was something stronger there now. Not loud, but undeniable. I'm not the same either, he said quietly. Elena gave a small nod. I can see that. Another pause. Then she said something that changed everything. But that doesn't mean things go back to how they were. The words settled between them. Clear, final, because this wasn't about returning. It was about what came next. And for the first time, that answer wasn't his to decide. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Not because he disagreed, but because he understood exactly what she meant. Things weren't going back. Not to the version of them that existed before. Not to the life he had walked away from. Not to the illusion that love alone could carry everything without effort. I'm not expecting that, he said finally. Elena held his gaze for a moment, not searching for reassurance, just measuring honesty. Good, she replied, because expectations, unspoken ones, had been part of what broke them before. Silence settled again, but this time, it felt less like distance, and more like space being rebuilt carefully. Daniel looked down at the baby in his arms, his expression softening again. She's peaceful, he said quietly. Elena nodded. She is. A brief pause. What's her name? He asked. Elena didn't answer right away, not because she didn't have one, but because this mattered. Then she spoke. Amara. Daniel repeated it softly. Amara. The name sat between them. Simple, beautiful, grounded. It means grace, Elena added. He nodded slowly. It fits. Another quiet moment passed. Then Elena shifted slightly, her expression becoming more focused. We need to be clear about something, she said. Daniel looked up again. This isn't about us anymore, she continued. Her tone wasn't cold. It was intentional. It's about her. Daniel nodded. I know. Elena held his gaze. No, she said gently. You understand it. But I need to know you're ready to live it. That landed differently, because understanding something and becoming responsible for it were not the same. Daniel adjusted slightly, holding Amara a little more securely. I am, he said. Elena didn't challenge him, but she didn't fully accept it either. Being here today doesn't prove that, she said. Her voice remained calm. It's what you do after this moment that matters. Daniel nodded slowly. Because that was fair. More than fair. I'm not asking for anything from you, she continued. Another pause. No forgiveness. No explanations. No promises. Daniel's brow tightened slightly. Then what are you asking for? He asked. Elena looked at him steadily. Consistency. The word was simple, but it carried more weight than anything else. Because consistency couldn't be performed. It had to be lived. Daniel exhaled slowly. I can do that, he said. Elena didn't respond immediately. Because this wasn't something she would believe in a single moment. This would take time. Real time. Time that revealed patterns. Time that exposed truth. After a moment, she reached out slightly. Give her back, she said softly. Daniel hesitated for just a second, then carefully placed Amara back into her arms. Elena held her close again, instinctively, protectively. That motion said more than words ever could, because it wasn't just about holding her daughter. It was about understanding her role now. Primary, unshaken, unshared. Daniel watched quietly, not with resentment, but with awareness, because for the first time, he understood where he stood, not at the center, not even beside her, but somewhere that would have to be earned again. If it could be, I'll stay in town, he said after a moment. Elena didn't look up. Okay, I'll find a place nearby. Another pause. Okay, her responses were simple, not dismissive, just neutral, because she wasn't making space for him. She was allowing him to exist near it. And there was a difference. Daniel nodded slowly. I'll come by when you're comfortable, he added. This time, Elena looked at him. That's not how this works, she said gently. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? It means you don't wait for comfort, she explained. Her voice calm, measured. You show up consistently, and comfort grows from that. Daniel absorbed that, because it reframed everything. This wasn't about asking for permission. It was about proving presence. Understood, he said. Elena gave a small nod. Then her attention returned to Amara. The conversation, complete, not resolved, but clear, and clarity, was more important than comfort right now. Across the room, Daniel stepped back slightly, not leaving, but giving space, because, for the first time, he wasn't trying to fix anything immediately. He was learning how to stay, and staying required patience, not performance. Back by the window, soft light continued to fill the room. Everything felt quieter now, not empty, not tense, just settled into something new, because what they had before was gone. But what stood in its place was something real, not built on assumption, not carried by comfort, but grounded in truth. And sometimes, that's where real rebuilding begins. Home didn't feel the same, but this time, that wasn't a bad thing. Elena stepped inside slowly. Amara held gently against her chest, the soft weight of her daughter grounding every step she took. The house was quiet, familiar, but no longer defined by what it used to be. It felt reset, not empty, not broken, just different. She moved through the living room carefully, taking in the small changes she had already made, the subtle rearrangements, the cleared spaces, the absence of things that no longer belonged. This wasn't the home she had shared with him. This was the home she was building for her daughter. And that difference mattered. Amara stirred slightly in her arms, a soft sound escaping her. Elena instinctively adjusted her hold, her movements natural now. I've got you, she whispered. Not just reassurance, a promise. Across town, Daniel stood outside a small apartment building, keys in his hand, his suitcase resting by his side. It wasn't anything like the place he had stayed before. No luxury, no statement, just a place, temporary, appropriate. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was quiet, bare, but for the first time, that didn't bother him. Because this wasn't about comfort. It was about proximity, about being close enough to show up. And this time, he intended to. Back at the house, Elena gently placed Amara into the crib, watching her for a moment longer than necessary, not out of worry, but out of connection. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the crib. This room was no longer empty. It held something real now, something permanent. And as she stepped back slightly, she realized something she hadn't fully put into words yet. She didn't feel like she was missing anything anymore, not because everything was perfect, but because everything she truly needed was already here. Across town, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, his phone in his hand. He stared at the screen for a moment, then typed, "I'm settled. I'll come by tomorrow." He read it once, then sent it. No hesitation, no overthinking. Because this wasn't about crafting the right message. It was about following through. Back in the nursery, Elena's phone buzzed softly on the table. She glanced at it, read the message, then placed it back down, not ignoring it, just not reacting immediately. Because now, she moved on her own timing, not his. The next morning came quietly. Daniel stood outside the house, his hand resting briefly against the door before he knocked, not out of nervousness, but awareness, because this wasn't a place he could walk into the same way anymore. A few seconds passed. Then, the door opened. Elena stood there, calm, grounded, different. "Hi," he said. "Hi." No tension, no forced emotion, just acknowledgement. She stepped aside slightly, allowing him in, not as an invitation, as acceptance of presence. He walked in slowly, taking in the space. It felt familiar, but not the same, because the energy inside it had shifted. "Do you want to see her?" Elena asked. Daniel nodded immediately. "Yeah." She led the way toward the nursery. Each step felt intentional, not rushed, not uncertain, just clear. Inside the room, Amara lay peacefully in her crib. Daniel stepped closer, his movements slower this time, more aware. He looked down at her, something soft settling in his expression again. "She looks even smaller here," he said quietly. Elena stood a few steps back, watching. "She is," she replied. Another silence. But this one felt different, not heavy, just real. After a moment, Daniel turned slightly. "I've been thinking," he said. Elena waited. "I know I can't fix what I did," he continued. "True. I know I can't come back and expect anything to be the same. Also true, but I want to be here. Consistently. For her." He paused. "And for whatever this becomes." Elena held his gaze, then spoke. "You don't need to define it right now." Her voice was calm. "Just show up. Simple, clear, enough." Daniel nodded slowly. Because, this time, he understood. It wasn't about words. It wasn't about promises. It was about actions, repeated, over time. Elena stepped closer to the crib, her hand resting lightly near Amara. Then she said something that carried quiet strength. "I'm not closing the door completely." Daniel's expression shifted slightly. "But I'm not reopening it either," she continued. A pause. "What happens next depends on what you do with the chance you have now." The words settled between them. Not harsh, but honest. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. And accountability required time. Daniel nodded. "I understand." And for the first time, it sounded like he actually did. The room fell quiet again. But this silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like something new beginning. Not rushed, not forced, but possible. And sometimes, that's the most honest place a story can end. Time didn't rush after that. It moved steadily, honestly, without pretending anything had been fixed overnight. Daniel didn't try to come every day at first, but he came. Often. Not with grand gestures, not with long speeches, just presence, short visits, quiet moments, small efforts that didn't ask to be noticed, but were. At first, Elena kept her distance, not physically, but emotionally. She observed, not judging, not expecting, just watching, because consistency isn't proven in a day. It reveals itself over time. Weeks passed. Amara grew. Small changes at first, tiny expressions, soft sounds that slowly became familiar. And in those moments, Daniel was there, holding her, learning her, understanding her rhythms, not perfectly, but genuinely. One afternoon, as sunlight filled the living room, Daniel sat quietly with Amara in his arms, gently rocking her. No conversation, no pressure, just presence. Elena stood nearby, watching, not closely, not intensely, but enough, because something had shifted. Not completely, but noticeably. "You're getting better at that," she said softly. Daniel glanced up, a small smile forming. "I'm learning." She nodded, and that acknowledgement meant more than praise, because it wasn't given easily. It was earned. Another quiet moment passed. Then Elena spoke again. "You show up," she said. Simple, but important. Daniel's expression softened slightly. "I said I would." Elena held his gaze. "Yes," she replied. A pause. "But now I see it." And that was the difference, because words had failed before, but actions were beginning to speak. Weeks turned into months. The house changed, not dramatically, but naturally. More life, more movement, more warmth. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. Daniel never tried to take space that wasn't offered. He didn't assume, didn't push. He simply remained consistent. And over time, that consistency created something new. Not the old relationship, but something quieter, more intentional. A foundation, built differently this time. One evening, as the sky softened into shades of orange and gold, Elena sat on the porch, Amara resting against her chest. Daniel stood a few steps away, leaning lightly against the railing. The air was calm, still. "I used to think love was enough," Elena said quietly. Daniel didn't interrupt. "I thought if two people cared about each other, everything else would just work itself out." She looked down at Amara briefly, then back ahead. "But that's not true." A pause. Love without effort, without honesty, without accountability. She shook her head slightly. "It doesn't hold." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know that now," he said. Elena glanced at him. "I believe you do." And that was something she wouldn't have said before, because belief had to be rebuilt, not given. A quiet silence followed. Then Daniel spoke. "I don't expect you to forgive me quickly." Elena didn't respond immediately. "Or fully," he added. She looked at him again. "That's not something you get to define," she said gently. He nodded. "I know." Another pause. "But I'll keep showing up anyway." Elena studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "That's all that matters right now." And it was, because this wasn't about returning to what they had lost. It was about building something new, something slower, something more aware, something that didn't rely on assumptions, but on actions. Amara stirred slightly in Elena's arms. Daniel stepped a little closer, instinctively, not taking over, just being there. And this time, Elena didn't step back, not fully forward, but not closed off either. And in that small space between distance and closeness, something real existed. Not perfect, but honest. And honesty was stronger than anything they had before. The sun dipped lower. The light softened, and for the first time, nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt forced. Just possible. Because sometimes, the strongest kind of love isn't the one that never breaks. It's the one that learns how to rebuild the right way. This final chapter reminds us of something powerful. Love alone is not enough. Real love requires growth, accountability, and consistency. If you followed Elena and Daniel's journey this far, then you understand. Some endings aren't about going back, they're about rebuilding the right way. So tell me, would you have given Daniel another chance? Or would you have walked away completely? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice matters here. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something real about love and life, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, where every story has a lesson, and every lesson stays with you long after the story ends.